Welcome, everyone. We are jumping right into a really fascinating, in-depth study of the end times today. All of the insights we're covering are derived directly from the source channel Ken Johnson, also known as Bible Facts. A link is below in the description box, and please remember that prayers for the Watchmen channels are very much appreciated. Today, we're going to take some incredibly deep, complex theological research and translate it into a clear, step-by-step summary. Whether you're a lifelong student of prophecy or you're just kind of curious about how all these ancient timelines actually fit together, this study is going to map it all out for you, presenting everything as a full summary of the source material. So let's get started. How long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Now, I want you to take a moment and just really think about that question. It's the profound question posed by an angel over in Daniel chapter 12. And honestly, it's the ultimate question that humanity has wrestled with for centuries, isn't it? When exactly do these prophesied events actually come to a close? Well, today's study is going to unpack the answer to that exact question. We're going to look at a comprehensive summary of prophetic calendars and timelines based entirely on this fascinating source material. Okay. Here's a quick look at our agenda for this study. We'll start with number 1, unsealing Daniel's prophecies. 2, the Dead Sea Scrolls connection. 3, the tribulation timeline. 4, calculating the final days. And finally, number 5, prophetic questions answered. Starting right off with section 1, unsealing Daniel's prophecies, with a focus on the time of the end. The source points out something really crucial here. Daniel chapters 11 and 12 actually operate in strict chronological order. It's best to think of these chapters as a massive zoom-in on the climax of human history. Chapter 11 ends with the destruction of the Antichrist, and then chapter 12 basically backs up to explain how that whole climax actually unfolds. So look at this specific command given to Daniel. He is explicitly told to shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. But pay really close attention to the promise right after that. Knowledge will be increased. Now, the study highlights that this isn't just some generic prediction about modern technology, like smartphones or the internet. No. It directly prophesies an unsealing of biblical and prophetic knowledge. It's honestly as if God created this brilliant time-release capsule of understanding, specifically reserved, locked away, to be opened by believers living right at the time of the end. And during this incredible climax, the text speaks of a great deliverance. Now, the source interprets this deliverance as a simultaneous rapture and resurrection, something occurring literally in the twinkling of an eye. Those found written in the book of life awake, and the wise are said to literally shine like the brightness of the firmament. Just imagine a star bursting with brilliant, radiant light against a pitch-black night sky. That's the kind of imagery we're talking about. The study interprets this as believers receiving glowing, glorified bodies, fundamentally changed in an instant. It's very much like the transfiguration of Jesus on the Mount. Let's move right along to section 2, the Dead Sea Scrolls connection. We talked about that increase in knowledge, but when exactly does that promised unsealing actually begin? Let's take a look. You have to think about the sheer magnitude of this historical alignment because it is absolutely mind-blowing. In 1948, Israel officially returned as a nation, and they weren't just gathered from one neighboring country, they were dispersed from all nations across the globe. This is reported as a direct fulfillment of the Isaiah 29 prophecy regarding the second return. But here is where it gets truly incredible. On the exact same day Israel came back into Jewish hands, the very first Dead Sea Scrolls were manifested to the world. Literally, hidden for millennia, this ultimate time capsule of ancient knowledge suddenly began speaking from the dust on the very same day the nation was reborn. And this wasn't just some modern realization either. The early church father Irenaeus, who, by the way, was a crucial historical figure just a few generations removed from the original apostles, he actually anticipated this exact moment. He stated that these sealed end times prophecies would finally be understood when Israel comes back into their land. The source highlights this to show that bringing Israel back to their ancestral land and restoring the ancient Hebrew language aren't just historical footnotes, they are literal prophetic triggers that unseal our understanding of these ancient texts. So a crucial point here is how we actually measure time when we look at these ancient scrolls. The angel in Daniel swears an oath for a time, times, and a half. But to really grasp what that means, we need to understand a specific Hebrew word, moed. Now, think of a moed like God's personal divine appointment book, rather than your standard modern January to December calendar hanging on the wall. A moed is a prophetic appointed time or a biblical festival, serving as a rehearsal for future prophecy. According to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, these timelines we are about to look at are not just random Gregorian dates. They are precise, divine measurements stretching out from one prophetic festival to another. Which brings us nicely to Section 3, the Tribulation Timeline, where we'll specifically focus on this concept of time, times, and a half. The sequence of events during this final 7-year period is pretty stark. Let's break it down into 3 steps based on the study. First, the Antichrist takes power and consolidates his global empire. Second, right at the exact midpoint of those 7 years, he halts the temple sacrifices and sets up the abomination of desolation. To put it simply, this is the ultimate act of desecration in the Holy Temple, where he essentially demands to be worshipped as God. And third, this horrific event immediately triggers a massive, brutal persecution. This supreme desecration is exactly why Jesus urgently warned believers in Matthew 24 that when they see this abomination, they must drop everything and flee immediately to the mountains. So Daniel hears about this terrifying 3.5-year period of scattering and persecution, and naturally he asks for more detail. How do the exact number of days align with this period? I want you to imagine this incredible cinematic scene for a second. An angel standing majestically over the waters of a river, raising both hands to heaven in a solemn divine oath as he provides highly specific numeric countdowns directly to Daniel. And that brings us to Section 4, calculating the final days. We are going to impartially break down the 4 distinct numerical timelines the source discusses: 1260, 1290, 1335, and 2300 days. First up, we have the 1260 days. The study explains that this represents the literal time times and a half. If you're doing the prophetic math with me, an ancient biblical year is 360 days. So 3.5 years of 360 days equals exactly 1,260 days. This specifically measures the intensely difficult period from the start of the scattering and persecution of the holy people all the way through to the very end of the tribulation. Next is the 1290 days. Notice the distinct contrast here. While the 1260 days measures from the start of the persecution, the 1290 days starts specifically from the moment the daily sacrifice is taken away and that abomination of desolation is set up in the temple. Because 1290 is exactly 30 days longer than 1260, the study details that there is a brief 30-day overlap or a gap. Think of this as a brief 30-day window of realization between the abomination being set up and the major intense scattering of the people truly beginning in earnest. Then the angel gives a third, highly specific number, 1,335 days. And he declares a profound blessing for those who wait and actually reach this day. The study details that this period extends 45 days past the second coming of the Messiah. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What monumental event happens on that 45th day to warrant such a specific divine blessing? This 45-day window into the millennial reign could mark a highly significant event. The source suggests it's perhaps the setting of the foundation stone for the new temple, or maybe the complete final gathering of Israel. Finally, we have the 2300 days, which are described specifically in the text as evenings and mornings. Now, the source imparts that there is some debate among scholars on this one. On one hand, this could represent 2300 literal days, extending from that same midpoint further into the future, perhaps for a later final temple dedication. Alternatively, because the text specifically says evenings and mornings, some theorize that if you combine an evening and a morning into a single 24-hour day, it could actually represent exactly half that amount of time, so 1,150 days, which obviously changes how it maps onto the tribulation timeline. When you step back and look at it like this, it brilliantly illustrates how all this math ties together chronologically. The 1290 days starts with the abomination of desolation right at the midpoint. Then, following that brief 30-day window, the 1260 days runs concurrently, marking the intense, continuous persecution. Finally, the 1335 days stretches past the very end of the tribulation, reaching 45 days deep into the millennial reign. It maps perfectly onto the prophesied timeline of the final wonders, measured out precisely from one appointed mued to the next. Moving into our final section, Section 5, Prophetic Questions Answered. The source takes some time here to address nuanced eschatological questions from the community. Let's summarize a few of these key insights. First up, a question on the Matthew 22 parable of the wedding feast. The source explains that the initial guests who refused the invitation represent Israel's official government rejecting the Messiah, and that rejection is what led to a broad, whosoever will invitation going out to the Gentiles.
shifting gears to the 144,000 Jewish witnesses mentioned in Revelation. According to the study, they are believed to become Messianic believers who are sent out for a very specific, timed ministry occurring strictly during the seal judgments. Finally, touching on a historically debated topic, speaking in tongues. The study points back to Acts chapter 2, identifying them historically as known literal foreign languages. It also stresses the Apostle Paul's strict instruction that they require absolute order and interpretation in the church to avoid any confusion.
The source also touches on the absolute uniqueness of the Ethiopian Bible, noting that it contains a massive, fascinating 88 books. This includes ancient texts like Enoch, Jubilees, and the Testament of the Lord. However, a crucial word of caution is given here for anyone studying them. While these ancient texts are absolute treasure troves of history, scholars really have to tread carefully. The numbers in these translations can sometimes get a bit, well, let's just say lost in translation when you compare them to the highly reliable Hebrew Masoretic text. Another crucial point on early church history is understanding our terminology, because it heavily impacts how we read early texts. When early church fathers like Irenaeus referenced the Catholic Church, they were not talking about the Roman Catholic institution that we know today. Not at all. The Greek and Latin root of the word Catholic simply means universal. So they were broadly referring to the universal, worldwide body of all believers in the Messiah, regardless of their specific local congregation or denomination. And that historical context is absolutely key when looking at early church doctrines. The study contrasts the early church concept of spiritual transmutation against the doctrine of transubstantiation. Let's just break those heavy terms down simply. Transmutation was this beautiful metaphor, meaning that deeply studying the Word of God transforms and transmutes your heart and your mind. Transubstantiation, on the other hand, was the literal, physical claim that communion bread actually turns into literal flesh and blood. The source reports that early leaders like Irenaeus fiercely debated and heavily condemned this literal idea, calling it a demonic heresy started by a man named Marcus the Gnostic.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of historical and prophetic ground today. We've summarized an incredible journey from the words of Daniel to the astounding 1948 discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right through to the precise math of the tribulation timeline. Thousands of years ago, the angel told Daniel to go his way, to rest, and that he would arise to stand in his lot at the end of days. As these ancient calendars continue to unseal our understanding of the 1260, 1290, and 1335 days, it leaves us with one vital, echoing thought to reflect on today. Are you prepared to stand in your lot at the end of days? Thank you all so much for joining this study.